The Blackwater massacre was a notorious and very bloody shootout which occurred in Blackwater, West Elizabeth, in May 1899 during a botched robbery on a ferry. The Vanderlyn gang were robbing the ferry but were ambushed by agents of the Pinkerton National Detective Agency, officers belonging to the Blackwater Police Department, and the popular gunfighter, Landon Ricketts. Over a decade later, the massacre was very well known throughout the United States, as many people were killed, including a helpless young woman, in a very large heist in the sophisticated and emerging settlement. Encouraged and emboldened by the new gang member, Micah Bell, Dutch Vanderlyn, the leader of the Vanderlyn gang, led the heist of the ferry, which was concealing bank money of up to $150,000. Two of the gang's most senior and prominent members, Hosea Matthews and Arthur Morgan, were pursuing another opportunity and did not participate in the heist. In the Chapter 1 mission, enter Pursued by a Memory. Gang member Javier Escuela, who also participated in the heist, told Arthur Morgan that the robbery was going according to plan, as the gang had the money and everything seemed fine. But suddenly, the gang found themselves surrounded by Pinkerton agents, and a massive shootout ensued. At some point during the shootout, the events of which remain unclear, Dutch brutally murdered a young woman by shooting her in the head. The Blackwater massacre definitely took its toll on the Vanderlyn gang, as several members were wounded and killed. Jenny Kirk, Mac, and Davy Callender were mortally wounded and eventually died. John Marston and Charles Smith were both injured, but their wounds were not serious, and they fully recovered. Only one gang member, Sean McGuire, was taken into custody and held by bounty hunters, specifically those working for Ike Skelding. The situation was looking particularly grim for the gang, so Dutch and Hosea hid the money in Blackwater, and the gang fled north through West Elizabeth and into Amberino, a state predominantly comprised of wilderness and mountains, with harsh weather to boot. The gang would eventually lose their pursuers in a blizzard as they continued to make their way north until they reached the abandoned mining town of Coulter. In the aftermath of the massacre, the entire southern portion of the state of West Elizabeth was placed in a lockdown, as Pinkerton agents kept watch over Blackwater, the Great Plains, and Tall Trees regions. In fact, the Pinkertons would remain there for much of 1899, and Blackwater itself would take a considerable amount of time to recover from the bloody event. Following the gang's arrival in Coulter, their spirits were very low, as Hosea and Arthur lay the blame at the feet of Micah, who encouraged and eventually convinced Dutch to proceed with the thoughtless and foolhardy heist. It was also Micah Bell who encouraged and emboldened Dutch to murder Heidi McCourt. As the complete events of the heist and resulting massacre remain unclear, what is known is that at some point, Dutch shot Heidi McCourt in the head, brutally killing her. The exact details of her death were described to John Marston 12 years later in 1911 by a complete stranger who is better known as the Strange Man, and they were particularly gruesome. In this unnerving encounter, John did not seem to remember Heidi McCourt or the incident itself. However, it was 12 years prior, and John may have purposely forgotten the murder and much of Dutch's and the gang's darker moments, as he had left the outlaw life behind shortly after the Van der Linde gang split, and began a new life as a farmer and family man.
Hello, John. John Marston.
Do I know you?
I hope so. I seem to know you.
I'm pretty good at remembering faces.
Are you? Do you remember Heidi McCourt's face?
Who?
She was a girl Dutch Van der Linde shot in the head on that raid on the ferry a few years back. Same one you got shot on. Pretty girl, until her eye was hanging out by a threaded tendon and her brain was plastered over a wall.
Heidi McCourt was indeed a helpless young woman who seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and got caught up in the massacre. Nonetheless, her death was completely unnecessary and avoidable, as she was merely a civilian and not a willing participant in the shootout. What is known about McCourt is that she was a young mother, and her precise age is not known, nor if she accompanied anyone to the ferry in Blackwater. As previously mentioned, gang member Javier Escuela, who participated in the heist, witnessed Heidi's murder and described what he saw to Arthur Morgan in the Chapter 1 mission, Enter, Pursued by a Memory. And just like the Strange Man in Red Dead Redemption, Javier's description of her death was also disturbing.
So, you were there, Javier. What really happened on that boat?
We had the money, it seemed fine. Then suddenly they were everywhere.
Bounty hunters?
No, Pinkertons. It was crazy. Raining bullets. Dutch killed a girl in a bad way. But it was a bad situation.
That ain't like him, though.
When Heidi McCourt was murdered, the reasoning for her death was unclear. Later on, after the gang was able to depart Coulter and pitched a new camp at Horseshoe Overlook in the state of New Hanover, both Hosea and Arthur inquired with Dutch regarding what actually happened. But according to Dutch himself, he told Arthur that the gang did what they did to escape, and that the matter was not for discussion. So according to Dutch's logic, a young mother had to be brutally murdered in order for the gang to escape Blackwater.
So, what do you think?
I think we're fine.
Fine.
Well, given the circumstances,
I heard things got nasty on that ferry.
you could say so.
And that won't lead to more repercussions.
Eventually, yeah, but like I said, we will keep moving.
What do you think, Arthur?
I don't know. We're here now. We make the best of it and move on.
Exactly.
Look, in these Dutch, there's not so many places to hide this way.
We will think of something. We always do. You always do. I need you strong now, my brother.
I'm trying.
So, what happened with the girl on that boat, the one in all the papers?
We did what we had to do to get out of there. End of discussion.
Okay.
Furthermore, John is approached by Dutch in the Horseshoe Overlook camp, and John raises the subject, inevitably confronting and calling Dutch out on the matter, pointing out that Micah Bell encouraged Dutch to shoot Heidi McCourt, culminating in a speechless Dutch who clearly can't handle the scrutiny and walks off.
How you doing there, partner?
Fine.
You've had a run of bad luck, huh? Blackwater, and then,
Sure. Was Blackwater really bad luck, though, Dutch? Or you and Mike acting real crazy? You tell him, Arthur. Tell him to wake up. He's lost something.
Blackwater was about surviving, John.
Not for that girl, it weren't.
You okay?
I was on that boat. I saw what Dutch and Micah did, but he won't admit it.
We can't change nothing now.
As John pointed out, Micah and Dutch were acting really crazy, but Dutch maintained that the Blackwater ferry heist and everything which occurred was about survival. This has clearly left John shaken and disturbed, as he also pointed out to Arthur that he was also there, on the ferry taking part in the heist, and saw how Micah and Dutch acted, and what Dutch ultimately did. And what John saw was the real Dutch van der Linde. Not the teacher, nor the enlightened leader he pretended to be, but an irrational, overly anxious, and ruthless madman and killer, who is an outlaw for life and takes no prisoners in his relentless and endless war with the United States government and civilization. While the events of the Blackwater ferry heist remain unclear, what is very plausible is that when the van der Linde gang were surrounded by Pinkerton agents, panic ensued, and not just panic from the civilians who were on the ferry and around the docks, but also within the gang itself. There can be no doubt that Dutch lost himself and control of the situation, and Heidi McCourt was probably very close to the action, perhaps near an exit from the ferry, and panicking as well. In the commotion and chaos, Dutch probably wanted her to shut up so he could think clearly, and Micah obliged, continually telling and encouraging Dutch to shut her up permanently. With the pressure mounting on a madman and murderer, with Heidi probably screaming into one ear and Micah in his other ear, Dutch snapped and brutally shot the young mother in the head. Nonetheless, what horrified John and the others is that they got a glimpse of the real Dutch van der Linde, a brutal killer who will not hesitate to kill anyone who stands in his way, regardless of not posing any threat or danger whatsoever. For Dutch van der Linde, any kind of impediment to his wants, needs, goals, and plans, no matter how superficial or trivial, was always a threat and must be dealt with accordingly. So no one can question his resolve or ability to lead, at least likely according to the man's own twisted logic.